I think one thing I would like to start off by saying is probably by way of a word of advice to anybody who constructs a big project of the sort that Stefan or we have managed to get. I think it's essential to know the expectations of the funding agency in question, because each one has its own specific approach. And the way you would develop a project for one funding body is very different from the way you would develop it for another. So the project that I'm going to present to you now is constructed very specifically with a view to the expectations of the European Research Council. And if I were to be applying for the same sort of research for example, from the German Research Council, the DFG, or perhaps even the INR or the AHRC in England.
Recording in progress.
Wow. Okay, then it would be. Yeah, then it would be a very different approach. We've had, Alice and I, for example, we had INR projects in the past. I've had DFG projects, and there it's possible actually to say much more straightforwardly what you would like to do. Whereas one of the issues with ERC projects, again, as Alice knows, because she had one of these, is that there's this element of high risk, high gain. And very often ERC projects are really, the concept of ERC projects is really calqued on the idea of a hard scientific project. You have to come up with a cure for cancer or for COVID or something like that, or put a man on the moon or something of that sort. So, this is really the model, and there has to be, there's something ever so slightly sensational about the results that you're trying to achieve, whereas what your actual intentions are maybe something slightly more modest than what's in the literature. Now I think they're actually moderating that process. We have Federica Venturi in the room, who tells me that now the high risk, high gain element has been attenuated somewhat, so we can be, shall we say, a little more honest and less sensationalist in the presentation of projects. So the title here itself looks a little bit sensational, Reconstructing the Pagan Religion of Tibet. Actually, what we really want to do is to get a better understanding of the kind of religion that perhaps was dominant in Tibet at the time that Buddhism came to the country, and that seems to have persisted in other parts of the country. We're going to talk about the sources in just a moment. Why have I chosen the term pagan? It's just a convenient term. I'm not trying to essentialize the concept of paganism at all, but this religion, or this form of Tibetan religiosity, is too often defined in terms of negatives, non-Buddhist, for example, or in terms, pre-Buddhist. We don't really know that it's pre-Buddhist. Folk, it's not really folk or popular, because there are specialists involved. So it's just as much of a non-folk religion as others. Another good term would be vernacular religion. But pagan is convenient because actually it corresponds very well to the Tibetan understanding, if not the Tibetan terminology. The kinds of cults and myths we're talking about are very much related to specific areas of Tibet. It's the cult of the Yul and the Yulha. And there is no better translation in Tibet for Yul than Pagus. Okay, so it is literally a pagan religion without talking about anything called paganism. So I'm here as the principal investigator. Marika is one of our two main expert advisors, and her component here is she's very much a specialist on many things, actually, but particularly for the benefit of this project, on natural language processing, on computing approaches to languages. Okay, so until rather recently, what do we know about the early religion of Tibet? We really, there's a pitiful amount of archaeology that's been done. Certain of our colleagues certainly have looked into archaeological aspects. John Belletzer, perhaps most famously and certainly most prolifically. But in terms of the textual tradition, we really have just what the few fragments we have from Dunhuang, some very important ones. Then we have 4 texts which turned up in the stupa called Gathang in southern Tibet at the end of the last millennium. These were just 4 texts which came out of a stupa, and they clearly resonate with the kinds of Bonpo materials, I'm saying Bonpo now, that we find in Dunhuang. And there's also what I'm calling black water. This is simply a translation of the Tibetan Chabnak, which is one of the components of what the Bonpos consider their own teachings. And these are probably texts and ritual and mythic traditions which are substantially indigenous and probably do not come from India with a lot of the rest of what's coming from India. So I hesitate. One of the reasons why I'm talking about pagan rather than Bon is because Bon has so much more in it than what I'm talking about. It inherits a great deal that comes from India, the entire tantric tradition, the Vajrayana tradition. The Bonpos would not see it like that. There's the entire philosophical tradition, which is absent from the kinds of texts we're talking about in the pagan complex. So this religion is not really Buddhist, it's not really Bon, and so we call it pagan. And why the egg? Well, because in most of the myths that are concerned here, the world, the kings, the gods, everything comes from an egg. And we enrich our textual sources, these 3 corpora that I just mentioned, Dunhuang, Gathang, and Chabnak, with recent discoveries. And this is really what this project is all about. It's the exploration, it's the examination of corpora of quasi-Bonpo texts that have recently come to light in Eastern Tibet. This is the area. This is in the triangle, if I can put it that way, of the provinces of Gansu, Sichuan, and Qinghai. Areas such as Tewo and adjacent areas, Chone, and so forth. And they belong to a tradition of priests, which are known variously in the literature as Leyu. Well, you can see all the variants on this here. Leyu, Legu, Hleu, Hlau, Hlabu. What this actually means, this is one of the things I hope we're going to determine in the course of the research. But anyway, it's a tradition of hereditary priests, broadly called Leyu. The person who really discovered this abundance of texts is this man. I want to give him credit from the outset, a certain Ngawang Gyatso, who is himself a native of this area. You can see him to the right of the first picture on the left, and you can see him to the left of the second picture. And he is now a professor at Lanzhou University, and he has been exploring this tradition for many years, and he was the one who really brought it all to light. And he is an incredibly generous and very capable person with whom I'm very happy to cooperate. Where does this tradition come from? It resembles, it's essentially collections of myths, collections of rituals, which bear an extremely strong resemblance to the kinds of things I've just mentioned in Chabnakpen, in the Dunhuang tradition. Locally, it's said that, well, these are the remnants of the chaplains of the Tibetan armies, the imperial armies who went out to the east. And when the army was demobilized, these religious traditions remained there and were passed down from father to son. Or else, it's sometimes said that these are the descendants of refugees from religious persecution that took place under Tisong Detsen, the famous persecution of Bonpos that we all know about. And they fled to Eastern Tibet, and the tradition was perpetuated there away from the main Buddhist and Yungdrung establishments. Is this true? No idea, but this is what's said. I will point to one rather intriguing thing, though. This is a text which has recently been translated and published by Pak Werner and Dan Martin, the Dakwa Lingdak, which is the earliest Bonpo Bunjung, Chöjung, religious history. And this is a discussion that takes place among a group of Bonpo priests when they're about to be thrown out of Tibet. They're given this ultimatum: you either commit suicide, or you convert to to Buddhism, or you leave. And some of them decided to leave. And the text says these people decided that they would. Some of them went to Yalong Soka, and then sudden others decided to go to establish the doctrine at Domgo in the south. In a footnote, Dan Martin says Domgo, Domjo is a corrupted form of Dongdom or Domjom, which he interprets literally as a box of bears, a way of speaking about the southern lands, otherwise called Mön. Okay, bear that in mind. I'm going to come back to Domjom. Okay. So let's talk about the texts themselves. Suddenly in 2005 or thereabouts, thanks to Ngawang Gyatso's discoveries, this man, Druktar, who himself was not a scholar, he was an academic administrator, he produced the first publication of texts in this collection. To the left, you have one of these Leyus, who was the owner of one of the groups of these texts. They're all contained in private houses. They're all passed down from father to son. And this is the first compilation of facsimile publications in 30 volumes. Okay, so it's just literally that. It's just photographs of these texts reproduced in the thousands. And this is the title. So Dome Datsang. So it's a Datsang Yul. So it's from the place called Datsang in Amdo. Datsang. Datsang doesn't exist. Okay. So what is this Datsang? Datsang is Druktar's understanding of the Tibetan original form of the Chinese version of this name, which is Dangtang. And Dangtang is actually not Datsang. It comes from Dongchom. And this is very suspiciously similar to the Domchom, of where an entire body of texts are supposed to have been taken in the imperial period. It's not in the south. It may just be a coincidence, but it's worth bearing these kinds of things in mind when we're tracing them. Another edition came out, another collection came out in 60 volumes in 2013. Then a much more carefully edited collection, selected and edited by Tsering Tar and Ngawang Gyatso himself. Many of you will know Tsering Tar, professor of Tibetan at the Minzu Dashui in Beijing. And this is just 10 volumes, but beautifully transcribed, edited. They've selected the most comprehensible of these texts. And then there was another collection which is about to come out in 100 volumes. So altogether we have 200 volumes of texts, a total of something like 35 to 40,000 folios of substantially incomprehensible Tibetan. Okay, so let's talk about the form over here. There are challenges. So there are challenges which many of us are familiar with, these contractions that are used, not just in these texts, but in others. The kind of thing you can see over here. Some of the contractions are very standard, others not so. There's a lot of it. And really, if we want to get a sense of what's in there, we have to look at the whole thing. How do we do that? It's not humanly possible, even in the course of a big ERC project like this. And on top of that, there's also an oral tradition. There are still some Leyus left who still do recitations. And obviously, it's essential to be able to collect as much as we possibly can of the oral tradition that accompanies this. You'll see Leyu over here, and you see Bai. I'm not talking about the Bai people. This is just my abbreviation for the Baima, which is a Tibetanoid group of about 10,000 people, also in, I think they're in Sichuan, Yunnan, in that area. And they have a textual tradition which is very similar to what we find in the Leyu literature. Let me just give you an example of some of the codicological problems we have. There's a collection known as the Bumshi, not to be confused with the medical Bumshi, which corresponds to the Buddhist Gyushi. So this is 4 collections, each one dealing with the propitiation of a certain category of divinity. And here we have the title page of one of these. So this is the one about the sadaks. Yeah, the sadak. Here we have the term sadak. But throughout the text, sadak is abbreviated, just like this. You have the sa followed by what is called the tsatak, tsatak or zatak. And if you don't know what this is, you're absolutely lost, because it occurs 10 times on every page. Similarly with the Nyen, another very well-known class of mountain divinities. Abridged in several ways, either like this, nya yata, the yata being a prefixed gao, quite common in other texts. Here we have some examples. So this here is Zakar Nyen. Then this is another example. I'll go through these examples quite quickly. And then we have this other there are different conventions for contracting the same term. So this thing that looks like a number 2 on the left is actually a contraction for nian. So this is nian chao, the variegated nian. And here we have another one, the nian yi. Okay. So a lot of these things are not unique. They just happen to be super abundant. But some features, codicological features, are unique. So here you have the folio numbers. Here you have folio number 4 in a class of text called Zhangen, which is quite common in this this corpus. So you have folio number 4, folio number 5, Zhangen Xi, Zhangen Nga. And then you have 8 and 9. And the numbers there look absolutely nothing like the Tibetan 8 and 9. That's because in the Leyu text, and here you have 10 and 11, that's because they use numbers that in many cases look absolutely nothing like Tibetan numbers. In fact, as some of you will immediately notice, the one on the bottom left looks rather like the Nepali numeral for 9. So these occur throughout the text. And again, if you don't know what they are, you'd think they're some kind of letter. And there are also lots of abbreviations or symbols representing and so for sources. Sources. We've just connection dropped. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so these are very common young summoning rituals, which you find probably in central Tibet as well, but certainly in the hinterland. Also, you have to, yang po is not yang po, it's yang be, calling the yang, this mysterious substance. Here's somebody performing one of these rituals in Mustang with a beribboned arrow and the leg of lamb with a swastika on it. Oops, okay, no, keep going. Then we have, sometimes you have to think a little bit, what do these titles actually mean? La Leng Qian, it's actually La Lu Qian Den. So it's for summoning souls, La, inviting, literally inviting the substitute for souls, the ransom for souls. And this is a soul retrieval ritual, also fairly widespread. And then I was very happy to see this ritual, the Minak Gosum, the three-headed black man, also quite common among the Bompos and also among Buddhists in different versions, Tonak Gosum or Minak Gosum. And then a whole class of rituals called Gathang, which are for the propitiation of warrior gods. Warrior gods, very important here. The texts themselves entail animal sacrifice, and also human body parts. You have to hang the different parts of your slain enemy in this effigy that you see over here. So warrior gods like the Dala, the Tukka, the Werma, the Shukun, the Chanseng, this whole classes and classes of these gods. These are some Leyus, most of them rather elderly. He's a rather younger man. You see that they use, notice the headdress he's wearing. That's made out of bear skin. It's called a domral. And they use the Bonpo Shang, the flat bell as well. This was a little video which I'm not going to show you. Time is short. But again, the recitation is interesting. Although they have the text, it's all done from memory. And every time he reaches the end of a page, he turns it over, even though he's actually sitting perpendicular to the text. It's not in front of him. Yeah. So the turning of the pages is actually part of the performative ritual. Okay, so the collections, altogether we have around 2,560 titles. I haven't seen the whole collection of the 100-volume set. Cataloging the collections, a lot of the work has been, because these texts come without catalogs. We have no index, nothing. We have no idea what's in them. It's just a jumble of reproductions. So Geshe Lundrup Gyatso and Naljo Tsering, who will be a member of the project, who is actually officially from the beginning of this month, he is a member of the project. Congratulations, Naljo, who is Naljo still doing his PhD, but will be a postdoc as soon as it's finished. He's now a research assistant. And this gives you an idea of the contents which we made from volume 1. And you'll see that a lot of it is not really comprehensible. Yeah. One of these, the first one, this is actually a canonical text. Why? Because the Bon monks in this area decided to try and put an end to this tradition which entails animal sacrifice, and they infiltrated the textual tradition with canonical works, including this one, which is the Kego Chopa, the ritual for closing the path to rebirth in the lower realms. But a lot of the others are very much part of the Leyu tradition. Other problems we have, as you will see from number 6 onwards, you start reading a text, you realize it doesn't make sense. Why? Because it's been put into the volume the wrong way around. You have to start at the end and then read backwards. The compilers really didn't know what they were doing. And this one over here, the entire volume here starts at the end and works towards the front. Yeah. So they're very beautifully produced volumes, but it's a complete mess. Why do we have these texts? Why have they been produced so lavishly? It's fantastic for us, you know. Probably the least useful of these collections is the one that was produced in 10 volumes by Tsering Thar and Ngawang Gyatso, because they cherry-picked it. They took out the most comprehensible ones that were they could edit most easily. And those are obviously the least interesting, because you can find some of these in the canon. Why do we have this massive incomprehensible text that people have got together when they don't really know what they're doing? It's all to do with the Chinese policy of the confidences, which was developed by Hu Jintao in 2012. And there was the encouragement to have confidence in the path of Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics, theory of socialism with Chinese characteristics, system, etc., etc. And then on top of these three, our hero, Xi Jinping, added a fourth confidence in Chinese culture. And this meant that anybody who'd come up with a project to develop Chinese culture, and of course, this is all part of Chinese culture, it's not Buddhist, it's not Indian Buddhist, it's indigenous to China. It's like the Gesar epic or Tibetan medicine. It's something that's encouraged by the state. You can apply for funding from the government and you will get it. So the last collection, this 100-volume collection, Naljo told me, the people who compiled it, they had absolutely no idea what they were doing, but they went around photographing texts, put them between covers, another 100 volumes, and they were able to get 20 million yuan from the government, which is about 3.5 million euros, I think. And you can see that it's actually a very lucrative business. I'm all in favor of this. You know, whatever makes this stuff available is fantastic. Anyway, so this is a background to the content, and I'm going to hand over to Marika, who will tell you. Oh, let's change places. Let's change places. Who will tell you technically what we hope to do with this.
Right. As the last speaker, it's my task to make sure that you don't fall asleep. I know it's past 7. I'll keep it short, really. I'm here to talk a little bit about the methodology. So going back to the slide that you'd already seen, these texts are not just difficult to understand, but as you've heard, there's also many of them. There's over 70,000 pages of written tradition, and there's the oral tradition. So all of that is impossible, as Charles already mentioned, to just read through as a human being or listen to and transcribe. So we need to search through all of them, though, even just to make the catalogue. We can't just, keep on asking Naljo to sit down and actually write these catalogues, because it will take him 100 years. So how do we do this? Well, we've opted for computer-assisted methodology, as in not letting the computer take over, but letting the computer help us to digitize everything. So we do this in 3 different phases. And the first phase is really to get all the data in digital format. And we do that through handwritten text recognition and automatic speech recognition. So handwritten text recognition can be abbreviated as HTR. Some of you may have heard of it. It's used an awful lot these days to digitize manuscripts. So it's basically the OCR version of handwritten text, let's say. We work together with BDRC, who will store all of our images and our e-texts. And then we also collaborate with Isukia, who are actually developing the software for us that we need to let a large team of monks in Kathmandu help us with transcription, after which it comes back to us and we check it, etc. So how does this work in practice? Well, first of all, you need to just transcribe some of these manuscripts manually. You can't get around that. Fortunately, there's a big EOC project in Vienna where people have already done that. So this is something that we can use as a good starting point. Now, the handwriting is not exactly the same. It is Ume, but not exactly the same. So it means that we have a little bit of an advantage, but it can't guarantee perfect results for us. So we do need some manually transcribed manuscripts. And this is the tool that we're using. It's one developed by Isukia. It's one of the PetChat tools. There will be many more. There's also editors for Tibetan studies, etc. This one is custom made for us. Basically, you see a page and you just type your results there, and then you move on to the next one, and then it's checked by their team leader and etc. before it's sent to us. Now, once we get all of it back, what we actually do is we train a neural network, or AI, let's just throw the term out there. I hate it, but we train a neural network really through transcribers, which is originally developed by research for handwritten text recognition. And this is an image taken from an article by Rich, postdoc, really working with me on the NLP side of it. And this is from one of their texts in the Vienna project. Once we, let's say, have given the computer some input, it can learn from that, and it can then produce an output. And the output then is given back again to the monks in Kathmandu, line by line. So we split that up line by line, and we give them what the computer guesses the transcription is. So the computer makes a prediction of the transcription, and then it's their task to correct this, because it won't be 100% correct, especially in the beginning. There will be many mistakes, but they will correct it. And basically we'll get it back and we'll feed it back into the model and we'll train it again, and our results will get better and better. If they come across some of these awkward abbreviations, etc., they have a nice little lookup Google sheet here where they can look up, well, about 16,000 abbreviations now. There will be another 16,000 added soon, and they will be able to find how they need to transcribe this. Right, now, for the spoken material, it's a little bit different. Of course, when you have spoken material, let's say for the rituals, for instance, you need to transcribe it as well. So you use different software for that. This is just a free software called Elan. You transcribe, you have your video there, you have your sound file, and you just transcribe it like this. Now, we've done this. I've done that with some colleagues in Cambridge for Zadzongke Tibetan, South Mustang Tibetan, which is from data that we collected last year in Mustang. And what we've done is trying to see how well we can, let's say, teach the computer to transcribe South Mustang Tibetan. So this is not standard Tibetan, right? It's not Lhasa Tibetan. So in the beginning, we only had a few minutes of data that we actually had transcribed. Transcribing this takes forever. I mean, ask Charles, he's been working on it for ages. 1 minute of video will take at least an hour to transcribe. So getting to 250 minutes is an incredible feat already. But that is usually not enough to, let's say, make your Alexa work at home, right? For South Mustang Tibetan in this particular case. So in order to make our Alexas and Siris, and there are other brands available, I know this is recorded. In order to make that work for South Mustang Tibetan, or for, let's say, the variety that is spoken in Amdo or any other Tibetan variety, really, what we need to do is try and use other data that is available. Now, fortunately, There's languages like English and French and German that have lots and lots of data available. Unfortunately, there's now techniques available to actually use that information to really help us with the transcription of languages that are what we call very, very low resource, that have no minutes transcribed yet, or just a few. So we did that, and we used, they're called Wave2Vec2 models. There are also Whisper models available. You can ask that, but I'll spare you the details. But what you see here in these graphs is that if you start out with 0 minutes of transcription, the computer is basically just guessing. The higher the line is, the higher the dot there, the more errors it makes, right? So the one there is, let's say, 100% errors. Although, to be honest, in words, you can make more than 100% errors, because it can also split your words wrong, which means that you can end up with 200% errors. So you start out with very, very bad results. But then as soon as you start training this model and adding some more data, so even with about an hour, 60 minutes, let's say, we've already halved our error rates there from 80% to 50%. So, 40 or 50% errors is still not great, but it saves you half the time transcribing. And then eventually we get down to, so we did this actually for Newar as well, for Kathmandu Valley Newar, so both Lalitpur, Bhaktapur, although the Bhaktapur results are a bit difficult. And then for Southwestern Tibetan. And as you can see, actually, when it comes to character error rates, we're now down to about 6-7% with very little data. What's nice is that you can optimize it even further. You can do all sorts of manipulations to the sounds. I won't bore you with the details, but what you can also do is use standard Lhasa Tibetan. There's a lot of data. There's 550 hours now collected by Manlam AI. And they have a model that we can actually use to do what we call transfer learning from one language to the other. And this is actually making our results slightly better. Although by the time we get to 250 minutes, it doesn't really matter. Now, what can you do then? You can then let the computer give it a go. Give it some sound fragment, let it transcribe it. Now, these are earlier results from before I just showed you. So we have some very bad results. Let's say the target there in Newar doesn't look anything like what the computer guessed, right? We have some medium results where it gets a bit better, but we also have some very, very good results. And now we're getting to a stage where most of our results are looking like this. So this is definitely progress. It's work in progress as well. It's not perfect, but it gives us some confidence that once we get the recordings for our new project, we can apply the same method and basically speed up our transcription process. So what are the outputs then of this first phase? Well, basically what we're going to create is HDR and ASR models, which you probably won't be that interested in, but maybe you are if you're wanting to transcribe your own manuscripts or do your own transcriptions for your fieldwork data. And you can use those. We'll also be producing a lot of what we call ground truth or training data for these models that people can use. And you can use that for any further natural language processing tasks. But what's crucial for our project at this phase is that we will let it create a label catalog of all of our texts with topics. And we need that because we only have 10 people in the project. So we can't edit all those 70,000 pages. We need to make a selection. And when I say we, it's maybe you are going to need to make a selection, but we need to know the topic. We need to know the content before we can choose, well, this is great for you to do a PhD on. So we're hoping to do that. And we also will make sure that we produce searchable e-texts of all of these. So in 3 different formats, we have diplomatic editions that reflect even the abbreviations in the manuscripts. Then we have normalized editions, which will expand those abbreviations, which will actually, let's say, regularize the spelling, etc., because there's a lot of spelling variation. And then we will have segmented editions, which are important because without those, you can't do any further NLP tasks. You need to be able to have a word before you do anything else because the characters actually don't work very well. Now, just to show you that this actually works, it looks a little bit like magic, but we did a little pilot study a couple of years ago already, where we, let the computer decide when we gave it a text, whether this was a Buddhist text, whether this was a Yungdrung burn text, or whether this was something else that was much more like one of the Leyu texts. And we gave it a couple of texts to train on. We let it give a label. We developed a little classifier. And as you can see here, these are all the texts that we didn't let the computer see beforehand. But you can see the Buddhist text, it's very small, but those are all sort of, they're texts from the project that I actually worked on with Jonathan Silk in Leyu, his EOC project. They're all very Buddhist texts, whereas the Leyu texts are all ending up in this cluster down here. And then there's text like the Ziji that are right in between, which is exactly what you would expect if those are actually more sort of Buddhicized pagan texts. Now, for the last two phases, we need to not just have the data, but we also need to annotate the data. And we need to make sure that we can find those features that make pagan religion actually pagan. And then finally, what we'd like to do is bring all of those features together and see how all of these different manuscripts relate to each other, and if they can maybe even be found similar to some of the Dunhuang or some of the Blackwater or Gathang collections. So how do we do that? Well, we use something that I'm very familiar with from linguistics, which is phylogenetic reconstruction of languages. Turn that into not genetic reconstruction, but mimetic reconstruction of cultural items. You can do this also for philological features, codicological features, so we'll do that as well. That's been done for many texts, especially Chaucer, for instance. There's so many different versions. You can see how they all relate to each other. What we are going to do is focus on religious features. And basically what you need for this is you need to find things that could identify, well, in linguistics, a particular language. You need to find things that identify, for instance, a particular scribe, like the types of errors they make, etc. And all of these features are going to be binary features. They're either present or they're absent. This will then allow us to group Leyu by manuscript witnesses using codicological features. It will also allow us to reconstruct the narratives found in those manuscripts and combine it to what we abbreviate here as DGWs, so the Dunhuang, Gathang, and Blackwater. Now we're going to then combine all of these results and zoom in on features especially to do with the pantheon, myths, rituals, and the worldview, which we think are the core aspects of what a religion could be. And then we're using phylogenetic software to measure and visualize similarities. So how do you find these features? Well, for instance, if you think about things like the rituals, there's very distinct rituals in those texts that you wouldn't find in typical, I don't know, Christian literature or Buddhist literature for that matter. So we're going to identify these features in our weekly reading groups when we go through these texts, and we keep track of them. Now, we also look at them from the point of view of the worldview, for instance, like what is the origin, what is the role of humans, etc. What is the structure of the world? And then we follow people like Terani and others who've done this for reconstructing folktales like Cinderella. And they really brought the phylogenetics to phylomimetics and talk about what they call motifemes and primary allomotifs and secondary allomotifs. So this is how these features relate to each other. They're hierarchically structured. So for instance, in Cinderella, they identified things like magical agents. And one type of magical agent is the shoe, very prominent feature in Cinderella. But you can have different options in all those different Cinderella tales all over the world. So sometimes the shoe is golden, sometimes it's pink, sometimes it's given by an old man. So all these differences, they make for different features and different feature hierarchies. And then you can actually count the similarities. So what we would look at, for instance, is, is the vampire a young girl? Yes or no? And is her father a blacksmith? Yes or no? And is the father the blacksmith who rejects her at birth, etc., or who rejects her later on in life? So all of these features together, or another one, the mother. Is the mother low caste or not? We can have more complex features like vampires and heroes meeting without recognizing each other, which leads to complications, life, etc., through various stages. So these types of features we'll try and identify. And then what you get after you've identified all these features, so this is not our tree, this is the unrooted tree for the Cinderella stories, but what you see here, and they're color coding it, so they're color coding actually per region. So the different colors stand for, let's say, Asia and Africa, and etc. And you see that there's definitely some regions where all of the, let's say, blue texts come out as one, but there's also regions like the pink ones where some of them are related, but some of them are maybe more closely related to some of the green ones. And that's where things get interesting. Then you see what the connections are between all of your texts and where you could probably do some more research. So that brings us to the very end. Of course, as Charles started with the high risk, high gain, and this is a big ERC project, we need to say more. We had to call this the groundbreaking innovations and impact part. Basically, what we're trying to do here is create what we said, the first ever comprehensive picture of pagan Tibet. This hasn't been done before. We're also trying to create all these NLP tools and feature databases, searchable texts, annotated corpora, etc., that will create on the way to compiling this, what we call a blueprint for phylomimetic reconstruction of religion. That's it.